Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us now. My name is Olena Grinyuk and I'm Regional Manager for the Central Eastern Europe at the SME Banking Club, and I will be your host today. And today we are going to discuss the topic of the security of mobile banking applications. And I'm glad to be joined by Teresa Gagnon and Petr Dvorak from Vultra, a company from Czech Republic, which helps banks to secure digital banking channels. So hello and thank you for joining.
Thank you everyone for having us today. And my name is Teresa Gagnon, and I'm Chief Sales Officer at Vultra. And today we are with Peter, as Olena introduced us already. So let's jump into it. We are talking today about digital banking security.
Teresa, just let me announce some organizational moments, okay? Before we go to the topic. So just to let everybody know that our webinar is planned for half an hour, and we are recording this webinar. So right after we finish, you will receive the link to the video and the presentation. And also in the end of the webinar, we're gonna have time for your questions. So please type your questions into the chat even now during the presentation, and we will be ready to answer them in the end. So let's go to the topic. So the adoption of mobile banking increases and the number of mobile transactions has been increased rapidly. So if we look at the Central Eastern Europe region, so here the biggest numbers are coming from Poland. So average increase of the number of mobile transactions that banks showed in their results for the previous year was close to 50%. So, and as the enforced digitalization that we are facing right now in current times of lockdown, so is pushing these numbers up. So cybersecurity in all digital channels and in mobile banking in particular is the priority for the banks right now. So what banks and actually fintechs as well should do to secure their mobile banking applications? And here I'm passing the word to you, Teresa and Peter.
Okay, thank you, Olena, again for introducing us. And exactly as you mentioned, so we are gonna be talking about digital banking security, which is becoming a very important topic. We see that very clearly that mobile and internet banking is becoming a critical channel for clients. And with that, there are a number of threats that we are trying to tackle and help the banks to protect their clients. So we are a cybersecurity company with a headquarters in Prague, and our clients are primarily banks and fintech companies. And we will show you in the presentation the tools and the strategies that the leading companies are doing to protect against threats. As you can see on the next slide, so this is describing the marketplace that we are playing in. So digital banking is becoming really critical for clients, and it was a trend even last year. It's now becoming even faster, with the current situation. So the recent numbers is showing that clients are using mobile apps more and more. But on the other hand, we also see that the number of threats, malware apps or data breaches are announced every day. And we need to take it into account, and we need to help the banks protect their clients and keep the channels really secure. So with that, I would hand over to Peter, who will present you more details and insights about malware threats and what tools are the leading banks using to protect their clients. Okay, we can move on.
So wait a second, just yeah. Application window. Keynote.
Will you share your screen, right, with us? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so you should now hopefully see my presentation, Olina. And
Yes.
So I will jump right to it. So thank you, Teresa, for the introduction, and quick apologies for the sloppy switching of the presentation. Of course, the technical difficulties are always there. So let me follow up by basically saying that what we notice is that the banks that are digital leaders themselves actually invest, and they are actually quite excellent in the area of security as well. As Teresa mentioned, we actually see quite a lot of attacks in the real world that are happening, and that's definitely something that the good players and the innovative companies are, actually paying quite close attention to. So I was talking about leaders, and I would like to show you one of those, which is Raiffeisen Bank Czech Republic. They actually have this, application for mobile token, which is strong customer authentication, basically the application for approval of payments or approval of login. And they have a lot of security components that are there besides just the basic security. They actually have this, transaction signing component, which is something that you need to have in order for such application to work. Then they protect fragile mobile runtime, iOS and Android with app shielding. They actually actively monitor mobile malware thanks to Malwarelytics. And they pay attention to secure networking, having strong PIN codes and passwords thanks to enforced PIN policy. And they have something called Security Advisor, basically a component that is able to identify some problematic situations, for example, a screenshot taken on iOS and so on, to let the user know. So quite a lot of invisible things that are happening under the hood of such application in order to withstand some problematic issues that can happen. Now, some banks innovate because they are leaders, and some banks innovate because they have to. There is, the strong customer authentication requirement, and generally quite a lot of requirement in terms of the PSD2. And most people view PSD2 as basically the open banking legislation, like as a mean to open banking to the third parties, which didn't really work that well, as we all probably see these days. But it also contains some minimum security standards, basically, which are luckily based on the best practices. So I think that, generally speaking, PSD2 is quite a good improvement in terms of security. Strong customer authentication, secure standards for communication, some malware protection, secure execution environment, and so on, are basically the results of the PSD2 legislation. And it's something that is definitely important because the banking is quite an important industry in terms of local economy. Basically, the regulators focus on the security because they try to keep the system under control. In most countries, banks are considered a critical infrastructure, something that something that the legislators need to protect in order to prevent not just individual damage to the customers, but also global damage to the economy. So, in a physical world, this is quite limited, to people exploding ATMs with gas for Barclays, or, driving cars into the buildings to steal the ATM, or, even the good old bank robbers who, steal the money from the bank and then sloppily ride from the crime scene on a bicycle. This was a fascinating story that is worth a movie. This, guy who was actually the Olympic candidate and decided to, rob banks and run away on bicycles. But in the digital world, it actually becomes much more complicated. Suddenly, there are no boundaries. There are basically no limits to how big the crime can get. And that's definitely something to pay attention to. So what do we see on mobile? We actually see four significant topics on mobile. The first one is mobile malware. That's something that is relatively new. We saw some proof of concepts quite, some time ago, but mobile malware actually became a real threat in 2019. Then there is something called weak activation, basically a process issue that allows to bypass strong customer authentication. Then we are, as always, looking at the after theft attack, basically what happens if you lose your smartphone or somebody steals it. And finally, there is weak runtime, basically weaknesses of the operating systems. So let's jump right into the mobile malware. Luckily, we have some good data from our own mobile malware database. We have a database with approximately 1.2 million samples, And we can see that a relatively small percentage of these applications is actually the malware. About 0.04% of the applications are malware. However, if you look at the highly dangerous category, which is essentially, some utility that is potentially dangerous to the application, or some rooting kits, or maybe some, app cloning applications or device automation apps, the number jumps to 0.17%, which is actually quite a lot if you think about it. Quite a lot of people have some dangerous application on the mobile phone. We can also see that approximately 1900 instances of apps are using accessibility services, which is Android's feature that allows you to basically read the contents of the screen and perform gestures on behalf of the user. And many applications are actually abusing this permission to, perform some legitimate use case. The best known category is from the password managers that are trying to use the accessibility features to fill in the credentials to some, forms on the screen. Then we have 22,000 applications that can do screen override, basically present some content over the screen, and 5,000 applications that can, read SMS messages basically with the SMS access. So the first time we met mobile malware was actually in Q4 2018, and it was a malware called QRecorder. Maybe you have read about it. I definitely suggest you having a look at it. And QRecorder was actually an application distributed on Google Play. So it was distributed through the legitimate channel, nothing suspicious at all. And it was actually stage 1 of a 2-stage attack. The only purpose of the QRecorder app was basically to install some other more malicious application. These types of malwares are actually called droppers because they are only used to drop the actual malware on the device, and their purpose is to fly under the radar. The second malware was actually using some vulnerability called StrandHawk, and I will show you how it works on a video. I actually have a practical example of the attack. So now you can see a screen with the Google service on top, and the Google service text is actually, bogus. It's something the attacker decided to use to deceive the user so that the malware looks legitimate. Then you can see some legal text, and it's not really a legal text. It's basically just some, random text. Again, the attacker decided to use for the accessibility service. And so now, if you enable this accessibility service on the malware, you can see some dialog, but the malware is actually bugging you if you do not approve it. The malware automatically enables and disables things that are required. And after that, it defends itself. So it, for example, disables the ability to, turn this accessibility feature off. So whenever you go to the settings and you try to turn it off, it basically just closes itself using the accessibility services, which is quite annoying because it's difficult to, remove the malware once it's actually installed on the device. In the second stage of the attack, when all the permissions are granted, this malware actually uses something called task affinity, the ability to insert own UI into the legitimate application. And I will show you how it works. Now the user is actually launching the Equabank application, and this is the fake screen. This is basically a phishing UI that the user inserted, and that is running inside of the Equabank application. So after that, the attacker would generally steal the credentials and intercept the SMS messages. Now, the phishing screens that were used for this type of attack were actually quite convincing. On the left, you can compare a real application by Raiffeisen Bank, and on the right, there is a fake application. So if you look at it at the first glance, it's basically not really recognizable. These applications look basically correct. The only difference is in the information it actually requests. The fake application requires credentials to the internet banking instead of the credentials to the mobile banking. So this is the first hint for the users that they shouldn't actually do it if something suddenly changes. But it's difficult to recognize. So this is something that happened in Q4 2018, and just 1 quarter later, we actually have a significantly bigger problem in the Czech Republic. We had 4 major malware attacks, and the total cost basically was approximately €500,000. So this is not something that would destroy Czech economy completely, but it's unpleasant. It's something that is happening, and you can actually see that it can happen over and over and over again using the same techniques. And unfortunately, to this big toll of losses, to big extent contributed one client who actually lost 100,000 euros from his account. So that's quite a big problem from the reputational perspective as well, because if you lose such a huge amount of money through mobile malware, that's definitely something that lights the fire in the bank. So why is that? Why is it so easy to make mobile malware? And the one word is basically commoditization. It's really easy to build a mobile malware these days, the mobile banker malware. So this is the example of Cerberus banker Trojan family. And actually, this is very strange malware because they have active Twitter account under it Cerberus. So they are sharing the news with the community. They even go as far as mock the researchers and have a conversation of antivirus researchers and so on to do the trolling like you cannot detect us and so on. And finally, they introduce new features. Just as you introduce new features in the internet banking or mobile banking, they introduce new features in the tool they use to create the malware. So, for example, they announced that they can target several more banks. They work on the latest versions on Android and so on and so on. So that's really like a software development. You have to give these guys a credit. Just a quick comment. Maybe you are wondering why we didn't report Cerberus on Twitter and why we didn't, pull the account down. And as it turns out, it's actually quite difficult to do it because you can really easily report some, hate speech or racial or let's say homophobic content. You can also really easily report, let's say, trademark infringement. But unfortunately, content like this, sharing information about, the malware that you are making during your evenings and nights, you really fall into the category, I don't like it on Twitter, which means that you can block the account. It's not really easy to report anything. You just need to live with it. And quite frankly, it wouldn't help that much because new malware families show up quite frequently. Just in April, this year, we actually see EventBot as a new malware family, which already targeted over 200 different financial institutions, basically banks and fintech companies everywhere. You can maybe even see some of your logos on the screen, if I'm not mistaken about the audience of this webcast. So the mobile malware is actually evolving quite quickly, and we just need to get used to it and prepare some security measures to tackle it. This is what Moneta Money Bank, one of our customers, does. They basically use a service called Malwarelytics. It's our service that they use to basically gain the visibility to the application, to the issue, to how many malware instances there are, how many devices are infected, what specific families are infecting the devices, and so on and so on. And they also show screen in case they detect something wrong on the mobile device. So let me stop for a while on this mobile screen that is visible now. There is this Služby Google Play text, which basically means Google Play services. And this is actually quite a common feature of malware. Basically, malware never says, I'm a malware. They basically always pretend to be Facebook, Chrome, Flash Player, or various system services such as update service, optimization service, Google Play service. And sometimes they even use some current topics. Currently, we see a rise of COVID-19 themed malware, or basically malware focusing on faking health or fitness applications. So that's one of the tricks that you need to communicate to the users so that they are able to remove the application. So this was a quick introduction to the mobile malware, and let's jump to the next topic, weak activation. This is actually an annoying problem that we are meeting relatively frequently with various customers and even with banks that are not our customers. And basically, the attackers are more and more commonly using social engineering techniques just to hijack the mobile banking by activating the mobile banking on their own device. So basically, how it looks practically, there is a fake screen, as you can see on the left. This is actually a fake phishing login screen, and except for a really sloppily chosen domain, which doesn't really resemble Raiffeisen Bank, this phishing page is actually done very well. You can see that there are no typos, no grammar mistakes. After investigating the HTML code of such a website, we even found that it uses the original code of the legitimate Raiffeisen Bank website. And after the user enters the client number, password, the user is also prompted to enter the SMS code. And after the user enters the SMS code for a login, which is something that he legitimately expects, the website just says action failed, try again later, and allows to try again later. And at this time, attacker is already inside of the banking account and can continue with other procedures. So usually the attacker goes directly to the mobile banking activation and activates the mobile banking in the very similar way. And when the mobile banking is active, basically the account is fully compromised. So that's a process issue that we currently help to tackle some of our customers, and we help through several ways. So one thing that we were considering, but which actually proved not to be so efficient, was using some stronger authentication. We use hardware token, hardware OTPs on the picture, but generally this is the idea of using something stronger instead of the SMS messages. And the practical problem is that the user actually rewrites the SMS OTP just as he or she rewrites the hardware OTP. So it doesn't really solve the problem in a general way. It only solves it for some automated scenarios, for example, through mobile malware. The mobile malware is capable of intercepting the SMS message, but it cannot really, force the hardware authenticator to, produce the SMS, the hardware OTP. So it helps in some scenarios. Secondly, we always suggest our customers to use some, let's say, slow channels. This usually means, branch or ATM, which is not really convenient for the user. But I think that the call center is actually a hidden gem in such situation, because it's much more difficult to actually forge a phone call when you compare it with, intercepting the SMS message. So definitely something that works better. Plus, the call center can actually explain everything much better. The next thing that we suggest is basically do something we call identity aging. There are beautiful things that you can do with various concepts about identity. And identity aging is the concept of not allowing everything for the very start. Once you activate the mobile banking, you should probably see your account, and you should be able to send payments to, let's say, regular accounts where you are sending payments, but you shouldn't be able to, take a loan and suddenly transfer all the money from your mobile account to some other, account that you never sent money before. The idea is that you can achieve this with sophisticated techniques such as some anti-fraud systems and transaction analytics. Or you can do it quite easily just by disabling the write functionality, so to speak, of mobile banking for some period of time until you communicate to the user that the new mobile banking was activated through the SMS message or through an email, so that you just stop the attack right away. That's definitely something that we recommend doing, basically. I know that there is really big pressure on doing everything real time, everything very quickly, but it has some drawbacks. So let's move to another topic, which is the after theft attack. And this is one of my favorite because it includes a lot of cryptography and a lot of technical topics. But I will try to keep it simple for this webcast, just to make it understand. So I think that the easiest thing that the attacker can do to hack the mobile banking is actually try to guess the PIN code. Most of the banking application actually use a numeric PIN code. Very often it's a 4-digit PIN code. And there is a very simple reason for that when we talk to the banks. It's because of the Revolut. Revolut has it, so we need to have it too. The best way to innovate is to do exactly what your competitors do. So that's basically the idea. But we have a PIN code with 4 digits. And 4 digits means 10,000 combination. And we can discuss, is it enough? Maybe it's enough. So my professional opinion is actually that 10,000 combination is from the category not great, not terrible. It's something that kind of works, especially if you have correct cryptography in place, if you have a limited fail count, basically failure of authentication in place, and whenever you need to verify everything with the server side, which means you cannot attack locally just on the mobile device. So 10,000 combination would be fine. But the problem is that the human head is really not a great random number generator. It doesn't know how to generate random PIN codes. The probability works perfectly, but the people do not cooperate. That's the typical issue that we are meeting. And according to the article of Data Genetics, which is older article but still one of the best resources, approximately 11% of users choose 1, 2, 3, 4 as a PIN code. And even more staggering statistics is that you can unlock 25% of devices just by trying the top 20 PIN codes. and you will eventually get to the device. So the advice is actually quite obvious. You should enforce strong pin codes. So what does it mean? So it means that the user should, when he or she chooses a pin code, be presented with some warning. For example, you have selected a weak pin code. This one is easy to guess. We recommend to choose a stronger one. But it's not so easy, because what actually is a strong pin code, right? So we can see that 1234 and 1111, 222, and so on. It's not really a strong pin code. There is clear pattern. 2468, 1357. It also is a quite easy sequence. 1212, 1313, or let's say 4545 are still quite simple pin codes. You can still see some clear pattern. Then there are years. You have Orwell, Space Odyssey, Prague, Spring, and the Velvet Revolution in those pin codes. So you can also see the pattern. So how about I don't know, 2580? That seems better. There is no apparent sequence, and there is no repeated digit, and this pin code looks perfect until you plot it to the keyboard, because there is a pattern. It's just a line, 2580. So you need to also exclude other patterns, 1379. This is basically the square, or the other pattern on the keyboard. It's also quite easy to exclude. So suddenly you see that there are patterns everywhere. What is it? What is a strong pin code? So you go on and you eliminate and you eliminate, and you end up with the latest last safe pin code, 8068. And the only problem is that this one has been all over the news recently because it's the strongest pin code, so it doesn't work either. So ultimately you basically end up with no choice. So obviously this is the wrong logic, in a way that some of the patterns I mentioned are ridiculous. Some of them are hard to guess. So basically you need a data. You need something to back your decision for strong pin code up. You cannot just see the patterns and say 5678 is a weak pin code. And I have a good news, because we have a freebie for you. We have open source library just for detecting weak pin codes and detecting weak passwords that you can use in your applications. If you do, please let us know. We will be happy to see our library to spread in the world. That's definitely something that we are trying to do with open source. So guessing the pin code is only the easy and, let's say, relatively unsophisticated way to attack data on a mobile device. Attackers can be slightly smarter. They can use forensic techniques for the data extractions. So essentially, most of the mobile security features in the operating system can be bypassed, right? And as a result, you can leak the pin code or some cryptographic keys from the memory, which would eventually compromise the authentication element. Basically, you would allow to, let's say, convert a new device from the existing one and submit payments on behalf of the user. So we have two advices to that. The first one is if you implement cryptography in your application, do not do it in Java and Swift. Do it on a low system level in a native C, C++ module, where you can perfectly, precisely control the memory management and erase everything that is no longer needed, so that when somebody finds your iPhone or Android device, there is nothing stored in the memory that could be compromised. And wherever possible, whenever the operating system supports it, you should use this hardware-backed key storage, which is secure enclave on iOS and Strongbox on Android, which makes it extremely difficult to steal the data from the device using these forensic techniques. So let me jump to another topic, which is weak runtime. Weak runtime is something that we currently consider a ticking time bomb, basically. Approximately 5% of the devices are actually rooted or jailbroken, and on such devices, you cannot guarantee anything. There is basically no guarantees that you can make. Your application could have been already modified by repackaging, basically changing the application bundle. It could have been modified by some debugger connecting to the application at runtime. It can be even modified by a fake system library, basically by providing some modifications to the system, and that's really problematic. So we generally suggest using some RASP or upshielding technology on every, let's say, security-sensitive application. Just to give you an example, this is one of the clever slides about Exposed framework, which is on Android. Exposed is basically a framework that can change the behavior of the system and APKs without touching any APKs. And they continue. That's great, because it makes that means that modules can work for different versions and ROMs without any changes. So there is basically a framework that can change behavior of any application without changing the application itself, for example, by hooking additional code to the system and so on. So it's let me show you what's the problem practically on a diagram. Let's say that you have some banking application running inside the application sandbox. And let's suppose that you have some correctly written cryptographic core on a low system level. Everything is perfect. And then you have some malware that is equipped with some routing framework. Such malware can connect to the application because it can bypass this, sandboxing, and it can record the pin code and, call the cryptographic core with legitimate payment and with correct pin code. Basically, the attacker doesn't need to attack the crypto; it can attack the application that is around it. Not always, the attacker doesn't always need to use such sophisticated techniques. They can actually use the accessibility services to read the pin code in case of incorrect implementation, and they can replay the pin code using the accessibility services on Android, which, as we saw earlier, are quite frequent. Quite a lot of people have some applications with accessibility services enabled. So it's really easier to attack the runtime of the application than a correctly written cryptographic core. And so the idea is that on a theoretical level, we have already lost the battle, but practically we can at least fight. We can provide some additional hardening of the application through the upshielding technology. One quick comment to the operating system security. Many people think that basically iOS is the secure operating system and Android is basically the problematic one. So just to make it clear, Android is definitely less secure than iOS because it's broken by design in a way. You have unresolved issues in application distribution. Basically, anybody can publish to Google Play almost without any restrictions. There is the accessibility feature on the application that you can use to basically steal the data. The attackers actually use it quite commonly to read SMS OTP codes delivered to the device. So they don't really need the access to the SMS. They just need to be able to read the contents of the screen. There are almost no policies on vendor operating system updates, so many users actually use obsolete operating system. And the last thing that I would like to mention is basically the biometry standard, which is shamefully fragmented among devices. So, but on the other hand, if you look at iOS and Android on the operating system level, these are both operating systems that can have vulnerabilities. iOS is basically based on macOS, Android is based on Linux, and these systems can have vulnerabilities. So I would suggest for further reading this article by my colleague Tomáš Kipta, basically dispelling the sufficiently secure iOS myth and the importance of shielding on iOS, that explains basically what the issue is specifically, with very practical examples and pointers to some ongoing research. So let me quickly wrap up by basically summarizing these 4 topics that we saw during the presentation. The mobile malware is a newly emerging threat that is becoming more and more severe and more and more commoditized. It will occur more frequently. This is one of the threats that will show up once and then you will see it all over the place suddenly. Weak activation is basically a problem in the process design, where banks allow pairing the application to illegitimate devices under certain scenarios, and that's actually also a high impact attack that we are seeing. Then we have the after theft attack with the presentation highlight on selecting the strong credentials and having some reasonable policy around credentials. And finally, we covered weak runtime, basically this notion that the operating systems are insecure in some way, and they contain weaknesses that attackers can expose, and there is nothing that will change that in the long term. So the banks should be active in protecting against those. The good news is that, again, I will recap the beginning of the presentation. We see that the leaders in the digital banking, the big companies, actually are leaders in security as well. They take care of evaluating these risks and introducing the appropriate measures. And hopefully we can help some of you to do the same thing. So if you are interested, we can actually send you our consulting document, which is a little bit more detailed, approximately 30 pages of a quality content of principle of secure mobile banking on iOS and Android. Just drop us a line, either to me or to Teresa, and we will handle it quickly. So this is everything for me, and I will be happy to answer your questions and hear your comments. I will be happy if you contact us with your questions as well.
Thank you, Petr. My first question is actually about this, strong PIN codes and passwords. The problem from the user side is, not only to input this strong PIN code and the password, let's say, but also to remember it afterwards, and not to keep notes on the mobile phone, or I don't know, on somewhere in the paper on the wallet. So which one actually? And if we talk, like more details here, actually, SMS authorization now is one of the common methods that customers are using to authorize payments, both in digital transaction and mobile. So what is the most reliable method then, in your opinion, and also to keep the balance between the security and the user experience, which is very important in mobile applications?
Yeah, sure, I will go to the answers. So regarding the PIN codes and users not being able to remember them, that's absolutely correct. That's why we mostly suggest using the biometry, but it has, again, some drawbacks. We could talk about those in too much detail maybe. So we also do not suggest to actually enforce stronger PIN code, like having 6-digit PIN code, because people still remember the 4-digit PIN code and they put 2 zeros at the end. Actually, the same article from Data Genetics shows that if you make the PIN code 5-digit long, not 11, but 20% of users will choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so the PIN code is actually quite problematic from this perspective. Biometry works slightly better, so you should probably use it wherever possible. And we will see what happens late in some time when biometry will be everywhere. Now, regarding the SMS messages, this is definitely a problematic means of authentication, because they are terribly unreliable on so many levels. One of them is basically the one I showed during the presentation. You can still do quite easy phishing on the users through the SMS. You can steal the SMS through the mobile malware. You can even use some more sophisticated attacks, such as SIM swapping or attacking directly on the operator infrastructure. And from this point of view, the software authentication, the PIN code on mobile or biometry on mobile, seems to work better. The software authentication is probably stronger than the SMS message. We were also thinking about hardware tokens quite intensively. I think that the future of banking in general is about software and hardware authentication. The people will have, the smartphones as the primary means of authenticating, and then there will be a backup method with the hardware token, and it's just because the SMS just will not survive next 5 years, I think.
Interesting. Thanks.
Even from the legislation perspective, from the PSD2, the SMS are borderline non-compliant. They are kind of compliant in the sense that the RTS actually makes wording against the SMS OTP, but some additional clarifications they proposed actually admits SMS OTP as something that can be used. So it's really on the edge of the legislation, kind of, and every bank had to deal with it somehow.
Also my question, and then I will read the one that we have from the attendees, is regarding antivirus applications. So is it possible to deliver somehow the antivirus apps in the package with the mobile banking applications? All banks really should, rely on the customer that they will upload and update these antiviruses on their devices by themselves. We have some experience here.
That's a great question. We actually ship our antivirus plugin to the mobile banking, so it's a plugin that is always there. Banks do not have to rely on users installing something which banks don't have under control. So that's the idea of malware protection for banking. That the plugin is there all the time. Of course, the banks should also suggest and educate the users in terms of security. They should, let them know that having some generic antivirus from any well-known vendor is a good idea, but they cannot rely on it. Also, from our experience, it takes quite a long time before some specific malware instance gets to the database of such a big vendor. For example, we had one attack in, again, 2019 with an application called PDF Converter. Basically, it was a fake application, again, a dropper malware, and it took 6 weeks from the time we reported it to the moment it showed up on radar of the antivirus makers. So actually, it takes quite a lot of time. I understand why they, the big companies who make antivirus care about, the big picture of the security, and single instances are, too much in detail.
I see, thanks. So I'm reading the question that we have. So do you have any malicious experience with the pass-fail software like LastPass? Better to avoid this on mobile. Is that a problem at all?
I think that using a password manager in general on mobile is actually a good idea. I think that you should do it for the applications that use some simple means of authentication, for example, through the username and password. This is, the never-ending frustration of somebody who does cryptographic authentication around the state of the authentication on web. More and more services are creating login pages with username and password. Users need to change username and unique password just for the service, and it suddenly becomes unmanageable. So what the users are actually advised to do, use the Google Authenticator, which is basically an application that generates 6 digits of entropy for the user, and then generate some random password that you cannot remember, so you need to store it in the password manager. So, if the authentication is in a way broken, the password manager is actually a good remedy, even on mobile. But for banking and for any, let's say, security sensitive applications, we suggest actually applying the cryptographic authentication, which surprisingly means that you can use short PIN code, let's say the 4-digit PIN code after some evaluation, and the signature and the proof is actually still stronger than with the password manager, and so on and so on. I think that the only problem that I would have with the password managers is that these are the applications that are typical to be repackaged and faked, so that users actually are tricked into installing some fake password manager, or even if you have some malware that can target them, that's also a problem. But using the password manager in general is a good idea. I would rather recommend it.
There's another one. So security for the mobile bank application is fundamentally dependent on the bank app correctly determine is the device where is to install is rooted or not.
Well, rooted devices are actually a big topic. If the banks are hesitating to disable mobile banking on rooted devices completely, because quite a lot of users actually have somehow modified the device. So, the bank usually has the option to drop 5% of the user base, or, have a slightly more secure application. Usually the business people win, and so the result is that you need to do some additional protection on rooted devices. Again, as I said, on a theoretical level, we have already lost, because on rooted devices you cannot guarantee anything, but you can actually make the life of attacker quite miserable by using some, let's say, hard obfuscation, which makes the code quite difficult to read and evaluate, and by implementing self-protective features inside of the application, for example, detecting and preventing debugger connection. So of course there are easy ways to implement such techniques, such as the first thing that you find on Stack Overflow, which is basically the developers forum, or you can use some more sophisticated and advanced methods. This is basically ongoing research. You need to do it all the time. You need to update the techniques as the attackers go forward. But you can actually make the application run reasonably securely on a rooted device, right? But of course, from the security perspective, we do not recommend it. We definitely would probably be happier if the bank said, okay, our banking cannot run everywhere. We cannot run it on compromised devices, right? But it's a difficult business decision.
Okay, so let's have probably additional 1-2 minutes if there will be some additional questions that we can take here.
Sure.
Well, my probably question will be, could you define or say some quick or short steps or recommendations of what actually banks and fintechs should do to secure the existing mobile applications, how to check them, and also what they should foresee when developing new applications, and actually should there be new demands maybe to mobile applications teams? What do you recommend here?
I actually mentioned, I will go back one slide in the presentation, this document. I'm sorry for peddling our our content too much maybe, but what we actually do is that we keep tables of specific topics there. So you can have a checklist of what to check. So for example, you should look at the authentication techniques and how you protect runtime. Good free list, something that is available out there, is basically methodology by OWASP. OWASP actually released this very good guideline for mobile application security called AppSec verification. It's currently in version 1.2, which is basically again a checklist of what people should look at. So authentication is one topic, mobile malware protection is another one, runtime security is next one. Then, of course, development processes in general. How do you build the application? Do you do it, or does your vendor do it somehow, and you don't really care, right? So there are actually quite a lot of things, and I think that the best thing that banks should do is to prepare a list where they have some boxes to tick. And this is probably 50% of the victory in the topic.
Yeah, okay, and the last question that I will read from Joseph on today's webinar. So I have got antivirus, firewall, VPN connection, and combination with the password manager and 2FA at my mobile. Does it mean I'm paranoid or just cautious? How much security is enough?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, I think that it's definitely good to install some security applications such as antivirus or password managers, or maybe a VPN proxy to protect your connections on insecure Wi-Fi's. Definitely something that doesn't really cost anything. You can get most of these applications for free or for very cheap, and we definitely recommend it. I think that specifically in the banking area, this is more a topic for the bank, not for the user. The banks are not able to delegate the security to the user reliably, at least in European context, right? Maybe there are some different contexts, but in such case, you should probably also, check what security measures does the bank take, right? But generally, as a security company, we are always little bit leaning towards the paranoia, because we know that we have very strong business people that are on the other side of the table, and it's always better to have some position for reaching a good compromise.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so if we don't, okay, last question from Adriano comment.
Yeah.
So there is a security breach with the biometrics, as I can see. If you have the unlock PIN of the mobile, you can add additional fingerprint on the mobile, where the same unlock PIN would be required, therefore compromising on the bank application.
Yep, that's an excellent question, very much detailed, because biometry is a big topic. So there is, first of all, theoretical problem with biometry, that once your biometric credentials are compromised, there is no way to regenerate them. You cannot just change your fingerprints or change your retina, or change your facial features and so on. So this is the big issue with biometry that is currently unresolved. And then there are small issues. And one of them is that the fingerprints or biometric data registered in the mobile device do not really have to belong to the owner of the device. There are just fingerprints that are registered. This is actually quite common, for example, in families where parents frequently register fingerprints of the children so that they can unlock the phone and play games on the mobile phone, right? And the issue with this is that you cannot really solve it technically. the way you can solve it is through terms and conditions, which is what most of our customers do. You basically need to, swear or accept that you will only upload your own fingerprints to your mobile device. As for the attack that was mentioned, where the fingerprints are added later, there is an option on both platforms actually to reset some biometric storage, basically to deactivate mobile banking when such event happens. In most cases, we decided not to do it because the users could be actually surprised unpleasantly, because you do not expect that you add additional fingerprint or change your PIN code on the device, and this will disconnect your mobile banking from your account, right? You will have to repair it again or reactivate. But it is somehow solvable, this specific problem. But the big problem with biometry, not really. Of course, another issue is family fraud. Somebody can unlock your phone when you are sleeping with a fingerprint. So there are actually some topics that are still uncovered with biometry.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for. Yes, a comment from Adrian. Apple is not supported. Yes, so thank you for your contribution, Petr and Teresa. So if our attendees, you still have some questions, so you're welcome to write directly to our speakers, Petr and Teresa. We will share the slides, we will share the contact details, so you're welcome to stay in touch with them. And maybe I think we have another topics for the next webinar actually here. So thank you for your contribution, and thank you all attendees for staying with us till the very end. So thank you, and see you next time online.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.